Hello, my name is Kiriath, and today we are going to talk about the return of every single Primarch. Well, every single feasible Primarch, not the ones that are completely dead. That would be maybe getting a little bit silly, although let's face it, we'll just have to see how it goes. This is brought on by a video by Varrak, which you can find in the description down below. Go and give it a watch. I'm not going to repeat everything he said, because he talks about the book Lords of Silence and the fact that Mortarion and his unusual relationship with time has kind of put into lore, actually into the story now, that the Primarchs are going to return. I have to admit, that isn't a surprise in any way, shape or form for me personally, although it is kind of nice to have some sort of in-universe confirmation, I suppose. As soon as we started seeing, we've had Magnus, Mortarion, Guilliman, and each of those have done incredibly well. They've sold really well. Games Workshop were bound to do more, and they kind of, especially with the Chaos Primarchs, don't really have an excuse not to. Especially the Demon Primarchs are in a kind of fairly unique position amongst the surviving Primarchs in that they're just floating around. They're not really indisposed. They're not really in a position whereby it would be difficult for them to make a return. They kind of, for the most part, at the end of the Horus Heresy, just fucked off into the Eye of Terror and then did absolutely nothing for ages. Angron, of course, being the exception to that. Mortarion wasted like 1,000 years chasing down the soul of his dead father. It's like mostly kind of fillery bullshit that happens with the Demon Primarchs. Fulgrim's just been chilling out on a throne of living velvet, so really, what's his excuse for doing that? Them coming back is kind of a given, and to be honest, the Loyalist Primarchs as well have to come back, because otherwise you end up with a balance of power that is so heavily tilted towards chaos that the very premise of 40k would cease to make sense. The Imperium is supposed to be an empire that is struggling to remain. It's supposed to be stagnant and crumbling, but through tremendous sacrifice and permanent war readiness, it kind of manages to push on. If you suddenly had a bunch of demigods who were in fact demonic demigods show up, that balance would be upset quite heavily. And so the return of the Loyalist Primarchs alongside that doesn't just make sense. I think, honestly, it's kind of necessary. So I was never particularly that, convinced that we wouldn't see all of them come back at some point, because they are incredibly popular on the tabletop, they're incredibly popular in the lore, and they are a foundation of 40k. The events of the Horus Heresy is what has set the story up to be how it is now. Bringing some of those living elements back into it was never going to be an unpopular move. I know there is a vocal number of people who don't like the fact the Primarchs have come back, whether it be because of lore reasons or just outright balance reasons, but it's a similar situation to Primaris, where the volume of those who don't like them doesn't really match the actual popularity brought on by the people that do. The thing that gets me about this, though, the thing that I found most interesting about this, and it's probably going to sound very dull in a way, but there you go, in which case, why am I making a video about it, because no one will watch it, is kind of the logistics of this whole thing. See, there's already the occasional comment and the occasional thing I've seen both on Twitter, on YouTube, I've seen a few conversations about it elsewhere as well, where there is a level of excitement that I think is probably a bit overstated for how long this process is going to take. The release of a Primarch is a big deal. It has to be a big deal because of what it is. It has to be something that is marketed properly. It has to be something that is prepared for properly. It has to be something that is supported by something else. Magnus was launched alongside Thousand Suns. Mortarion was launched alongside Death Guard. Guilliman was launched alongside Eighth. There has to be a support network in place rather than just going, here's a massive model, use it with the rest of your stuff. It's a driving force, I think, the release of a Primarch, and it's not just that central model they want to shift, they want to shift associated models as well. It makes sense if you present someone with, I'll be perfectly honest, my Emperor's Children army, I'm intending to have the whole thing kit bashed. If tomorrow they unleashed Demon Primarch Fulgrim along with a full range of Noise Marines, I'd buy them. I'd buy Fulgrim and I'd buy the Noise Marines to go with them, because I would want them to be... It's like the complete package. That's what you want. And that is most likely what they'll do. When we see the release of other Primarchs, I'd be very surprised if we saw them just come out by themselves. So I don't think we're going to see like a Primarch a month for the next year or something like that. That'd be way too condensed. They'd be cutting into their own sales with that, if you get what I mean. That's why I think as well, we're unlikely to see 2 Primarchs come back at the same time. We might, in the story, see it, if that makes sense. But in terms of actual physical releases, you don't really want to launch 2 competing models that are of similar scale and similar cost. It just doesn't really work unless it's like the launch of a brand new army or a range refresh. For something like a Primarch, I feel like it has to be done spaced out, essentially so that people can recharge their wallets before you drop the next Primarch on them. Now, not everyone is going to buy every single one, obviously. In fact, I would argue that most people don't buy every single one. But there are enough people with multiple armies who are sitting on both sides of the Chaos/Imperium divide who most likely would want 1 or 2 of either the Demon Primarchs or the Loyalist Primarchs. It's probably going to be a long process just because of, firstly, how detailed and how close they are to the finalisation of current Primarch stuff. I mean, if you think about it, it was like a proper gap between Magnus and Guilliman. It was a proper gap between Guilliman and Mortarion. It's going to be a proper gap between Mortarion and the next one. Not just because of trying to make it so that they are as popular as they can be in that moment and continue to sell for a few months beyond that, but also there is the whole design aspect behind it. It kind of has to be done in such a way that it feels natural and well spaced. And that, I think, is especially difficult now when you look at the release schedule that Games Workshop has. I mean, they release a hell of a lot of stuff now. In terms of like monthly releases, there are, frankly, a vast amount of kits that come out compared to, a few years ago at least. The actual rate of release and the rate of new products has gone way up. And again, that's something that kind of needs to be thought about when you're looking at something the size of and the like scope of the Primarchs. There's also how do you maintain the balance as well. Because it'd be kind of easy to just go, all right, we've got, say they have Angron and they've got Fulgrim, they're both finalised. Do you want to actually release Angron and then Fulgrim and have all 4 Chaos Gods represented, but still only have them being phased off against by Guilliman? That presents a severe lack of balance. That looks... For a start, it looks like there's some favouritism going on in the form of Chaos get all the good stuff, which admittedly is very rare because Chaos don't always get all the good stuff. But also, story-wise, universe-wise, it gets a little bit daft if Guilliman is now facing off against 4 of his demonic brothers and he's somehow coming out on top every time, or at least surviving every time. There has to be more of a balance between good and bad. I say good and bad, you know what I mean? Very, very simplistic terms for the shit-stained mess that is the Imperium, but we'll stick with good and bad just for the moment. There has to be a proper balance made up, which again kind of depends on other releases as well. If we take the idea that the Primarchs aren't just going to be thrown out one at a time on their own as standalone products without anything supporting them, that's not going to work. You need stuff around them to, not to shift them because they don't need shifting, but it's to make the most of that release window. I think really we're going to be seeing the release of a Primarch maybe 3 times a year, maybe if they really push it. Most likely probably 2, and they're going to be surrounded by other product launches. It's going to be spaced out and it's going to take several years because there's also the fact that you can easily use this stuff to shift other things. You can easily produce a box that had a Primarch in it, and people would buy the shit out of that box. You could make the next edition of 40k, stick a Primarch out at the same time, and guess what? It's going to sell. Well, it will sell well anyway, but it'll be an added incentive, the same way Guilliman was for 8th. There's a lot that kind of gets in the way of the simple statement of they're going to release all the Primarchs. there's so much more to consider in terms of, launching an actual product, because that's the thing as well. The Primarchs coming back in the lore is all very well and very good and could happen at any time. The Primarchs coming out in terms of physical models, actually coming to the tabletop, is a completely different factor altogether. The two, in a way, aren't even related. You can write someone in and out of a story, no problem. Writing someone into the tabletop and producing a model for that someone is significantly more difficult and relies on actually having a schedule that allows for it. Really, the thing that I'm interested most about is to see how often we see them turn up, whether it's connected to large events, whether it is connected to the launch of new ranges, whether we see a gradual refresh of a load of stuff that is Primarch specific in order to shift, extra units surrounding that Primarch. And I would be genuinely surprised if it took less than... how many are there? I'm going to say if it took less than 3 years, starting next year, like 2019, if it took less than that for the feasible to return Primarchs returning, I would be massively surprised, because I would assume it would take a little bit longer. But that's just what I thought about when I saw that and heard that news. How long do you think it will take? Do you think they will spread it out? Do you think it will be supported by other product ranges at the same time? Do you think we're going to see anything in the way of interesting boxes or campaigns to go along with it to shift units? Well, to shift Primarchs. Unit sounds very impersonal, but then again, it's a product like anything else, so I suppose it is. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. In the meantime, feel free to click anything of these, video, Patreon, subscribe, all that shit. Click it if you like, don't click it if you don't want to, and I will see you for the next one. Toodaloo.